When you have a setback in OCD, it can really feel like you've gone back to square one. You may have made lots of progress. You may feel that you were, really beginning to do things a bit differently, doing exposures, learning about acceptance commitment therapy. But then you have this bad day or a bad few days, and it can be so frustrating. It can feel that all of that progress was for nothing. But I think it's so important to understand that, setbacks are actually just a part of the process of learning to get over OCD. One of the things that I think so many people struggle with is this idea that progress should be a kind of linear thing, that we should be kind of moving forward in this kind of progressive way, and over time, we should just be getting better and better and better. And the reality is that unfortunately, getting over OCD, the recovery process, is not quite like that. As you can see here, one of the big problems is that you make a bit of progress, but then typically something comes up, a challenge, maybe a new theme or a new idea or an intrusive thought pops up out of the blue, and suddenly you're back into the same old trap. You're doing the same old things again. You're getting frustrated. You're telling yourself you can't do it. But really what's happened is this is just a kind of momentary passing thing. What you need to do is, as soon as possible, you just need to try to get yourself back onto the right path again. And when you start practicing acceptance and compassion again, you refocus on your values and your goals and you get moving, typically you start to kind of push forward again. Only this time, maybe you're going to push further forward even more. You're going to make more progress than you had done initially, only for maybe a few weeks later for you to experience another challenge, another setback. And this is typically really how the process of getting over OCD really is. And here's a famous quote by Joseph Campbell: "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And, with getting over OCD, really what we obviously have to do is we have to learn to lean into our own discomfort on a regular basis, to practice exposure activities, to do real life exposure activities where perhaps you're avoiding something or perhaps a difficult situation comes up. Your anxiety gets really triggered and you want to avoid it, but you make a conscious decision to say, you know what, I'm going to keep on pressing forward with this, despite the fact that, things are perhaps a little bit difficult. So actually, part of this process of getting over OCD very much does involve us having to learn to kind of lean into that discomfort, to recognize that we are going to have difficult times. We are going to come up against our boundaries. Exposure is kind of recognized as one of the most important ways of dealing with OCD and anxiety in the long term. And with good reason, because what it does is it pushes us out of our comfort zone and it gets us moving in the right direction. The problem is that when you come up against, that discomfort, when you face that anxiety, what tends to happen is we kind of tell ourselves a story about it. We kind of say, this is too much, I can't deal with it, or this is too strong. The anxiety is winning, I'm going backwards. You're really not. What's really happening is you're coming up against your own limitations and you're learning to kind of lean into that, to push against it, and to prove to yourself that actually you can overcome that obstacle, that thing that you've been telling yourself you can't do. If you do a little bit of that thing each day, slowly over time, you begin to recognize that actually you can do a lot more than you thought that you could. And, even though at times it kind of feels like, you've gone back to square one with a setback, the important thing to recognize is that you never go back to square one. It doesn't matter, if you have setbacks here and there. Really, the learning that you experience, the things that you're gaining from doing exposures, from practicing acceptance commitment therapy, those things can't just be undone. You can't just forget about them, because you've had a setback. They're there in your nervous system. You just have to learn to kind of get in touch with them again. And if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I do now have a 12-week program to help you to break free. It's based upon my own personal experiences of dealing with OCD for many years, and also the work that I've done in helping people to overcome it. If you're interested in applying for that, you can by heading over to my website, robertjamescoaching.com. There's a link in the show notes. And all of this relates to something that is known as growth mindset. And that's by the psychologist Dweck. And here's a quote: "The passion for stretching yourself and sticking to it, even or especially when it's not going well, is the hallmark of the growth mindset." And this is the kind of attitude that obviously we need to try to bring to OCD, to recognize that you are learning to push yourself. You are learning, to lean into that discomfort. You are going to experience, adversity sometimes. Having a growth mindset is all about recognizing that adversity is a part of the process, that it's not always going to be easy. And actually, those difficult times, what they give you is an opportunity to learn and to grow and to become more yourself. And that's the way I think we need to try to look at setbacks in OCD. Kind of building on that really is this idea here that, setbacks are actually data. They're not failure. What we need to do when we have a setback is to try to step back a little bit, to consider, what's going on. Are we experiencing a lot of stress in this moment? Do we have a lot of anxiety going on? Are there external factors that have caused this setback to happen? So often we just get caught up in judging ourselves and getting angry with ourselves when, a lot of the time there's real reasons for why the setback may have happened. And then try to be compassionate with yourself. Remember, if a friend came to you and they were struggling with something similar, I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't judge them in that way, that actually you would offer them some compassion and kindness about the situation. And we need to learn how to kind of give that to ourselves as well, to recognize and tell ourselves, hey, okay, things haven't gone perfectly here, but you know what? I can try again this afternoon. It's not a huge problem. Maybe I can let myself off the hook here. And this is a practice that you can learn over time. And then finally, to adjust, use the insights that you gain from reflecting on what happened to try to perhaps do things a little bit differently the next time. So then we have something called the comeback protocol. So, the really important thing is to try not to panic. So often we want to kind of fix the situation. We want to start problem solving it. We get caught then in the rumination cycle, because as soon as we start trying to problem solve OCD or a setback, if you get into that too much, if you start ruminating on it, a little bit of reflection, that's helpful. But as soon as we start ruminating, going around in circles, well, we're panicking and we're going to make our situation a lot worse. If you can, try to refocus back onto your values and your goals. What are some small steps that you can take today that will get you moving again on the path towards the things that you want to be doing in your life? And, another important thing is, don't try to fix everything all at once. Try to take one small step that gets you moving in the right direction. And over time, that momentum will start to build up again. And, one thing to kind of finish on here is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I really like the work of Joseph Campbell. He was a mythologist. He went all around the world learning about different ancient myths. And what he found is that every single ancient myth around the world, or ancient culture around the world, shares this idea of a kind of hero's journey. The hero's journey kind of goes like this. There's a kind of calling. At the start, the hero, or what I like to call the everyday OCD hero, is living their relatively normal life. But then something changes. They realize that they're getting more intrusive thoughts, or they're getting more anxiety. They're getting these horrible thoughts that they really dislike. And that's a kind of calling, a call to change, a call to action. And when we accept that call, then we get on to our journey, our path. once we're on the path, then we can start learning new things about ourselves. And yeah, we're going to have adversity, we're going to have challenges, but when we frame it as a journey in that way and we try to see it in a positive light, the difficulties, the challenges, as opportunities for kind of growth, when we think back to growth mindset, this is one of the best ways I think that you can learn to kind of think about OCD. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is we kind of get a little bit stuck in this calling phase where, in a way, we don't want to accept the calling because we don't want to change. And this is a huge problem within OCD. I think we get very comfortable with, the discomfort of OCD, with doing the compulsions because they've become a kind of safety blanket. They're the things that, that kind of keep us feeling safe when we do feel really, really anxious. We're performing those compulsions because that's the normal thing for us to do. To not do that, well, that's very uncomfortable. That's going to make things a little bit more difficult. And so when you do begin to change, or when you recognize that you need to change and there's a calling, often there's resistance to that and we don't quite want to do it. But once you recognize, okay, I am going to get out there. I am going to start learning new things about myself, and I am going to push myself to do exposures and to come back to the present, to let go of ruminations. Well, you start feeling a lot better because now you're actually taking action. You're learning about yourself. You're developing yourself. You're on this kind of exciting journey and adventure. Well, it may not always be exciting, obviously, with OCD. A lot of the time, it's very painful and very difficult. But at the very least, it helps us to see that setbacks are just a part of that journey. And at some point, you return home on this journey, but you're not the same person anymore. You've learned a lot about yourself. You're more strong, you're more resilient. You have a lot more resources. You can enact change more in your world with the people around you in your community. And obviously, these are all very positive things that are on the other side of learning to deal with OCD more effectively. So, if you're struggling with setbacks, I really, really understand that. I was there for many years myself, but they are a normal part of the process. And, you do never go back to square one. That's so important to recognize that, as long as you're kind of continuing that process, you try to get back on the horse when you fall off, well, you're going to continue to make progress. And, I think that's a much more helpful way at looking at it. So many thanks. Remember, if you are struggling, I do have the 12-week program to help you to break free. To find out about that and book in for a free discovery call, you can head over to my website at robertjamescoaching.com. There's a link in the show notes. Many thanks, and I will see you next time.
This video is for education only. It's not therapy or medical advice. If you're struggling, please speak with a licensed mental health professional.